Okay, so now I've mentioned to you how to work with basic images, and the technique that we used was using or utilizing two different images, one for the regular state, the A or even the A-link state, if you're used to working with A-links inside of Dreamweaver or CSS, and we had one for the A and one for the A hover, and they were two different images. As we can see here in the assets window, we have one that says B up and one that says B over. So in other words, when we're rolling over these, the hover is swapping out the original image and replacing it with this second image. So why did I mention that there was another way of doing this that might even be a little bit better? Well, let's understand first and foremost that the technique that I used here, two different images, up and over, what's good about it is that we didn't write out the text ourselves. The text was actually written out in CSS, which is great because now I could just come over here, go into my list item, and create another list. Or, like we said before, you can just put your cursor here, press return, write out some words. Here we go, some words. And as soon as we turn this list item into something that has a link, just by putting a pound symbol or some other link, bang, we now have another A element, and it's perfect. It looks exactly the same as everything else. The text is there. So I didn't need to write text on each one of these. So that's really good. It's one good thing about the technique that we used. Now, something else that you would notice if we were doing this with JavaScript is that most of the time, especially if you're working with Dreamweaver, it'll also include a little script that says preload the second image. So in other words, preload images would ensure that when I am online, see, if you're previewing this locally on your machine, you probably won't have anything of note. But as soon as you put these HTML files onto a server, when you roll over the first image, it's going to take, a brief, glimpse of time, especially if they're small images like the ones that I have here. And you'll notice, it's a 3K size, which is not really much, but what would happen is if that second image was not preloaded, then the first image or the first link that I would roll over, there'd be a slight glitch, a little hiccup that would sort of blink. And once we had all of the second images loaded, well, it's just the 1 second image, B over. Once that was loaded, the other ones would be, perfectly fine, no problem whatsoever. And as you can see here in the live view, it would work just like this, and everything would be exactly the way I want it to. However, it's just that first image. If that first time, if the second image is not loaded, then what's going to happen is it's going to take a second just to load that. So one way to get around this, I'll go back to my regular view. One way to get around this is to use something called the Pixie rollover technique. And in this technique, we have one long image that represents both states. In this case, it's the opposite way around. I should have put the dark blue first rather than the light blue. But nevertheless, we can get around this. So let's see how we can go about working with this. Here, if I select my first regular state, the A state, instead of using the B up, I'm going to say, let's use the Pixie rollover method. And if I choose and say OK, and if we apply this, let's see what's happening. Well, look, we're still positioning it on the bottom, and we're still positioning it left, and that's perfect. But we're saying no repeat. The only reason we're not seeing the second part of this image is simply because we have the image size exactly the size of 200, which is what my A tags were defined as. So because of that, the A tags are 200, it's only showing half of the image. So on one state, in fact, I'm going to change it. I'm going to make the position be on the right, and you can see what happens when we press apply. So it's the dark portion. It's basically aligning things on the right hand side. So we'll click OK. Then if I go to the hover state, I'm going to go to the background, choose the Pixie rollover, and we'll leave this one on the left. So if we click OK, let's look in the live view and you can see what happens. Look, It looks great. Everything is just the same, and you might be saying, well, what's the difference? Well, remember, because it's loaded one image, it doesn't need to preload the second state. So all we're doing is shifting it from one side to the next when we create the rollover. And that creates a beautiful navigational element that you can work with. And like I said, it's very easy for you to, take this LI information. You could even come in here and copy it, paste it down here. I could say more words, for example. And no matter how many of these you add, what's going to happen is you will have more and more of these files showing up. So here in the live view, we can see that the more words is showing up just the same words and the rest of the ones in our links. So it's all worked out super nice, very beautifully, and we've only got one image to do it with. Very nice technique called the Pixie rollover method.